This beef stew is terrible. It's not fit for human consumption, my daughter Amber declared, freezing the air in the room. Amber, who always views her brother Vince's wife Belle as an adversary, wore a malicious smile today as well, looking at Belle as if waiting for her reaction. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, she stood up and walked past the dining table to open the window leading to the garden. I watched this unfold with a puzzled look. Upon reaching the garden, Amber placed the bowl of beef stew in the doghouse. Our family dog peeked out of the doghouse, on guard, and barked loudly. Amber turned around, and with a mocking laugh, said, "This beef stew is only good enough to feed to a dog," addressing Belle directly. I could no longer remain silent and was about to stand up. But Vince caught my eye and gestured for me to stay put. Tilting my head towards Vince, he signaled me to look beside me, where my husband Trevor was staring at Amber, veins throbbing on his forehead, a rare sight. His unusual demeanor silenced me instantly. Trevor, still fixating on Amber, said in a low voice, "Amber, leave our house." My name is Wendy. 38 years ago, I married my classmate Trevor, and we were blessed with a son and a daughter. Marrying and having children at a young age meant we often faced cold stares, but we devoted ourselves to parenting and work. The countless nights Trevor and I wiped each other's tears over the unpredictable journey of parenting are beyond count. Especially our son Vince, who has always been curious and often led us on thrilling adventures with his reckless actions. Time flies, and now he's over 30, having matured, yet his adventurous spirit remains unchanged. After graduating, he founded an IT company and is the busy executive, ever quick to act on his ideas, embodying a certain free spirit. Supporting such a son is no longer just our job. His wife Belle plays a significant part. Belle, 3 years Vince's junior, met each other in college by being part of a same club. She's observant and intelligent, too good for Vince, some might say. Even after many years, Vince and Belle are incredibly close, always bringing a smile to those around them. They've been living with us since they got married. Belle is usually cheerful at home, but there are times when she looks pained. For instance, when she sees a lively family at the grocery store, or when passing by children walking with their grandparents. Trevor and I have long been aware of this and worried silently. One day, while Vince was away, Belle confided in us. "I feel guilty for not being able to give Trevor and you a grandchild." She had been troubled by not being able to conceive, especially feeling sorry towards us since we and Vince are fond of children. I comforted her, saying, "Children are a blessing. We don't mind at all. Please don't worry yourself like this, Belle." Trevor also added in a lighter tone, "Right. Besides, we already have a lovely grandchild," and lifted our dog Cooper into his arms. As I agreed with a smile, Belle also burst into laughter as if relieved. Trevor and I exchanged looks and smiled, reassured. To us, Belle is undoubtedly our precious daughter. If she suffers, we suffer too. Despite these events, we continue to live our lives in peace. Our relationship was good, and we fully shared household chores, so there was little stress from living together. We were a family that knew nothing of the typical mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflict, but there was just one problem. It happened when our eldest daughter, Amber, came home. "Hey, I'm back. I'm so tired." Amber is Vince's younger sister by 4 years, and only a year older than Belle. After getting married, she moved out to live with her husband in a condominium in the neighboring town and is currently 5 months pregnant. Because she's pregnant, Amber comes over to our house quite frequently. That in itself is not a problem, but the issue is Amber's attitude towards Belle. "Hey Belle, isn't the kitchen dirty? Can't you keep it cleaner?" Amber speaks to Belle in a presumptuous manner, always acting superior and mocking Belle. Amber, not even 2 weeks since her last visit, quickly enters the kitchen and snickers at Belle, who was there. Belle just looked down silently. Happening to be at the entrance of the kitchen, I saw this and called out Amber's name in a stern voice. "Amber! Apologize to Belle!" Thinking I wasn't there, Amber, with a shrug, hurried over to me. "Mom, it was just a joke. Come on, don't take it so seriously." Just as I was about to speak again, Amber cut me off. "Besides, there's something I've been wanting lately. Let's talk over there." And with that, she pulled me by the hand. Her attitude was entirely different from how she treated Belle. I sighed deeply, giving up on resisting and letting Amber drag me along. Amber frequently comes back to seek comfort and ask for pocket money from us. Though Trevor and I rarely give in, she's persistent. Being begged for money by your own daughter doesn't feel great. I sighed again and looked back. There was a man quietly following us. He was Wally, Amber's husband. Seeming to be of a meek character, he always stands silently behind Amber when he comes to our house. Catching my eye, Wally repeatedly made a sorry gesture with his hands. Both my husband and I, as well as Vince, have cautioned Amber about her behavior towards Belle, but it always ends with mere verbal regret. We hoped her husband Wally would speak to her, but there wasn't much hope for him, always trailing behind her. As I turned my face back with resignation, Amber suddenly stopped. Surprised, I looked up to find Vince blocking our path. Vince, having the day off from work, looked at Amber with an unusually stern face. A rarity for someone as usually calm as Trevor. Whether Amber noticed Vince's mood or not, she raised a voice in a whining tone. "Vince! I'm back! You know, there's something I want to tell you." But Vince interrupted her in a low voice. "Amber, I hope it's not true, but you didn't take anything from Belle's wallet, did you?" Shocked, I couldn't help but raise my voice. Stealing someone's belongings is a serious crime. Even if it's between relatives, it's not forgivable, and it would not be strange if it led to legal action. Unable to hold back, I intervened. "Vince? What's going on?" Vince started to speak with a displeased look. "Every time Amber comes back, money disappears from the wallet. Belle brought it up. I don't want to suspect my own sister, but... Amber, what's going on?" When I looked at Amber, she seemed a bit startled when Belle's name was mentioned. Then, exaggeratingly distorting her face, she said, "Blaming a thief inside the family? How scary," and deliberately rubbed her arms as if cold. Both Vince and I were lost for words at her reaction. Vince, as if snapping back to reality, raised his eyebrows and said, "So you're not denying it, which means you did it, huh?" And she yelled, "But Amber, do you really believe her over your own sister, without any evidence?" Seemed determined to feign ignorance. Unable to stay silent. "Amber, if it's true, it's unforgivable. Be honest." I also faced Amber. Feeling the pressure from both Vince and me staring her down, Amber perhaps felt cornered, her gaze darting away before she began to tremble slightly. "Even Mom doubts me? That's so unfair." Hearing this, Vince beside me let out a heavy sigh. Amber started to whimper, but Vince and I, knowing her for so long, could see right through her fake tears. Vince, with a look of exasperation, urged her to stop the crying act and be truthful, but Amber wouldn't comply. Wally, behind Amber, looked nothing but bewildered. Eventually, unable to bear it anymore, Vince half forced them to leave our house that day. It seemed Belle had been watching the whole scene from the shadows. Seeing her drop her shoulders in resignation, I hurried to apologize. Belle, with a troubled smile, said, "It's not your fault." But I couldn't help feeling terribly sorry. Still, with Amber being pregnant, the thought of refusing her visits was painful. From that day on, as Amber's visits approached, Belle seemed to sigh more, troubled by the thought. A long weekend came, and Amber and Wally arrived at our house on the evening of the first day. They seemed tired from their activities, frequently mentioning their fatigue. Despite being dumbfounded by Amber's behavior, we welcomed the two of them. Belle, who had been sighing until moments ago, now greeted them with a smile. But Amber. "Belle, I'm tired, so make yourself useful and get me a drink. Can't you be a more useful wife?" Continued her usual attitude towards Belle. Even when we all admonished her. Okay, sorry." She only responded with. I told Belle she could stay in her room, but she smiled wryly, saying she was in charge of cooking. Then, around 7 p.m., our dining table was graced with a meal centered around beef stew. Seeing Belle bring out the food. "You should have made something more extravagant since I'm tired." Amber took the opportunity to mock. Even as Vince and I scolded her, she acted as if it was nothing. Belle. "It's okay. Let's eat." Smiled and diffused the situation, and somehow, we all sat down together at the table. As I was about to comment, "This is delicious," someone spoke over me. Ugh, this beef stew is awful. It was Amber, laughing mockingly. All eyes turned to her, but undeterred, she continued. No, really, this is too bad. This isn't fit for human consumption. Saying this, Amber stood up with the bowl of beef stew in her hand. Following her actions with our eyes, Amber walked past the dining table to open the window leading to the garden. Then, swiftly, she went down to the garden and placed the bowl at our dog Cooper's kennel. I was speechless at her audacity. Returning from the garden, Amber, with a twisted smile, "This is only good enough to feed to a dog," said to Belle. I was about to stand up, unable to stay silent. But Vince's glance stopped me. Turning to Vince with a puzzled look, he silently gestured for me to look beside him. There, Trevor, with a vein throbbing on his forehead, was glaring at Amber. Silenced by the rare sight of Trevor's anger, I held my tongue. Trevor, still glaring at Amber, spoke in a low voice. "Amber, leave our house." Amber, who had been smiling, voiced her confusion with, "Huh?" and turned to Trevor abruptly. Trevor is usually calm and rarely gets angry, so Amber likely has little memory of him ever directing such an angry tone at her. Intimidated by Trevor's stern look, Amber stepped back, looking at me for help. Quietly standing up, I went down to the garden to retrieve the bowl of beef stew. Tentatively, I stroked Cooper's head to calm him and returned to the room, facing Amber again. Then I began to speak. "Amber, this beef stew wasn't made by Belle." At my words, Amber's eyes widened, clearly shaken. "Then, who made it?" "Dad did." I answered Amber's question calmly. Sighing at the surprised Amber, I continued. "Dad made the beef stew you liked when you were little. Vince got a casserole, by the way," I said, pointing at the table. The delicious-looking beef stew and casserole on the dining table made Amber's face turn pale in an instant. After a moment of hesitation, Amber returned to her seat and picked up the soup that was nearby. "Dad, it's a joke. Look, this soup is delicious too," Amber said with a forced smile as she sipped the soup. Belle raised her hand with a slight gesture. Actually I made that." Amber's face turned from pale to bright red at Belle's words. She quickly put down her spoon and rushed over to Trevor. "Dad, please forgive me. I didn't mean it," Amber pleaded in a cooing voice, clinging to Trevor's arm. However, Trevor didn't even turn to face her, no matter how much she shook his arm, showing his back to her. Realizing the situation, Amber bit her lip and started trembling slightly. As we silently watched, Amber clenched her fists and slammed them down on the table hard. "What's with always favoring her?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she shouted loudly. Ruffling her hair, making it messy, she glared at Belle. Belle flinched slightly. "How can you enjoy tricking and mocking me like this?" Amber's words made Belle look disturbed. "I never intended to deceive," she responded. Amber spat out her words and glared at us with resentment. "Pretending to be the good girl, always, always. Everyone's fooled by this woman." I couldn't help. "Why do you see Belle as an enemy? We're family." "But ask." Tears spilled from Amber's eyes. "How can I see someone who just walked in as family? Yet you force me to accept her as such, and everyone dotes on her." Amber declared it absurd not to dislike her. Once she started, she couldn't stop, pounding the table as she yelled. "Our house is struggling as it is, and there she is, living off Vince and looking happy. What the heck? Unable to even give Vince a child." Belle looked down, hurt by Amber's last remark. Vince. Amber raised his voice. Thoughts of defending Belle and rebuking Amber crossed my mind. But facing this raw, exposed Amber, different from the one who usually sweet-talks us, I found myself speechless. In contrast to me, Trevor solemnly began. "No matter what you think, your behavior up to now and today isn't acceptable." Amber bit her lip with a pained expression. Raising her tear-streaked face, she shouted at Belle. "This was my place. Give it back." Then, a dry sound echoed in the room. I looked around in surprise, and Vince, about to stand up, froze in place. Amber, holding her cheek with a dazed look, looked up at Wally, who had just approached. Yes, it was Wally who had come to Amber and slapped her, causing the sound. Amber's face distorted with shock, and the tears she had retracted quickly filled her eyes again. However, before Amber could speak, Wally started to talk. Amber, you've done and said things you shouldn't have. Apologize properly, Wally said to Amber with a firm voice. But, Amber muttered in a tearful voice, looking down. Wally also crouched down to her level. Can't I be a place for you? Can't our baby, who will be born soon, be a place for you? Amber looked up abruptly, surprised. Wally smiled gently at the astonished Amber. Besides, you still have a place here. So, you shouldn't destroy it yourself. Hearing those words, Amber finally started crying aloud. I'm sorry. Dad, Belle, I'm sorry. Amber wailed. Wally silently hugged her as she cried. After calming down, Amber properly apologized to Belle for her previous behavior. She also admitted to taking money from Belle's wallet, not with the intent to use it, but to trouble Belle. She returned the full amount on the spot. And Belle said she wouldn't blame her any further. Vince was still angry, but seemed to accept it since Belle forgave Amber. Trevor and I also had a thorough talk with Amber. She spoke stiffly about feeling lonely because we were always busy with Vince, her panic when Vince, having become independent, brought Belle into their lives, seemingly taking away the affection. And about the financial struggles with maternity and newborn supplies, admitting she had been too ashamed to speak up. Amber said she wouldn't visit like before but asked to be allowed to show her grandchild's face. Trevor told Amber gently, If you're in trouble, of course, we'll help. You'll always be our beloved daughter. Don't hesitate to tell us anything. You're welcome to come home. And he softly patted Amber's head. Amber, puzzled, said, But, Dad, you were so angry. You said to leave. Frowning. That. I was angry because you tried to give Cooper the beef stew, which had onions. Didn't I teach you long ago that onions are toxic to dogs? Trevor said with a cheerful laugh. Amber, surprised by the explanation, shrunk a bit. I'm sorry. And apologized. Since that day, Amber and Belle have been getting along awkwardly but somehow making it work. Being close in age seems to help them find common ground. Amber, are you feeling okay? You can sit down. Thank you, Belle. But I also want to improve my cooking. Watching the two standing side by side in the kitchen, I felt relieved that the bonds of our precious family had not been broken. Being a family doesn't mean understanding everything about each other. Sometimes clashing, discussing, and building relationships is the way forward. With this in mind, I vowed to continue cherishing my beloved family.